Hello, and welcome to this episode of Standing Apart, the podcast that explores why being different is a superpower, with me, Nigel Ridpath. In this episode of Standing Apart, I'm joined by Justin High, entrepreneur and author of Stress Nation. What makes this conversation especially interesting is that Justin is looking at stress from a slightly different angle. His argument is not simply that modern life is busy or that people need to get better at coping. It is that technology has fundamentally changed the way stress operates in our lives. We talk about cortisol as what he calls the master hormone, the way our natural rhythms are meant to work, and what happens when notifications, content, and constant connection keep the nervous system switched on long after the working day should have ended. We also get into the business side of this. Justin explains how that insight led him to build a company, why he chose an evidence-led route in a supplement market full of noise, and what all this might mean not just for individuals, but for leaders and organizations as well. So if you've ever felt the real problem is not stress itself, but the fact that it never seems to stop, I think you'll find this a thought-provoking conversation. And keep on listening beyond the interview. It's time for my 1-minute rant to make a reappearance. And this one's a doozy. Okay, I'm delighted to be joined by Justin High today. Justin's got a really interesting background and runs a company called Rebalance Health. He's also got a book all about stress, which is obviously a topic that many of us can relate to. So first of all, good day, good afternoon, Justin.
Good afternoon, Nigel. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with understanding a little bit about stress and what has brought you to this as a topic of interest.
That's an interesting question. I pivoted out of my last company with an interest in looking at supplements specifically for skincare.
Okay.
And we were asked to do that by Nestle, and we took a look at it. And for one rational reason or another, I pivoted away and started looking at endocrinology. And I was really captured by cortisol. It was a hormone that I felt was extremely fascinating and really wasn't getting any attention in the world. And that was, 2019, 2000. Really, we started the company in 2020. So really it was that 19 to 2020 period. And obviously COVID was hitting at that time as well. Yeah. And I was completely amazed because what I found out was that almost every molecule in the human body has a cortisol receptor, meaning when cortisol is elevated, you feel it from head to toe systemically everywhere. And I ended up calling it the master hormone because in my mind, it ruled everything else. When I looked at how cortisol functioned, I realized, wow, it's an amazing hormone, and it does so many wonderful things from the body, from immune support to, sleep regulation, energy, and so forth. But it's primarily known as the stress hormone. And it's also known as the fight or flight hormone.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get a lot of good press. It gets a lot of bad press. So let's really focus on it. It's a great hormone. And what I learned is as you go about your day, your body goes through a natural circadian rhythm. And as you wake up in the morning, cortisol is elevated and high, and you want it to be as high as possible because it gives you energy. You get up and go. It starts to peak around midday, comes down in the afternoon, and by the evening, it should be as low as possible. And if it was in a baton race, it would hand the baton over to melatonin. Melatonin would say, hey, it's time to start getting ready to go to sleep. You'd get that drowsy feeling. You'd go to bed. You'd fall asleep. You'd stay asleep. And the cycle would repeat the next day.
Yeah.
What has happened in the world, which I found fascinating, is the world evolved over the past 30 years in a very rapid pace in relation to technology. Email, internet, social media has gone crazy. And if you bucket all of that in a very generic term, I call it content. Okay. We used to have limited pieces of content. Now we have unlimited pieces of content all day long. And so the problem isn't that we experience stress. Humans have always had stress, right? The problem is that today, stress never turns off.
Okay.
Technology removed the off switch from our nervous system. And so what has happened is technology has created a permanent peak of stress all the time, right? And that has basically thrown the biology of us humans completely out of sync. So there's a very distinct difference between stress and anxiety, okay? Anxiety, right, is basically replaying that event all day, all night in your head, right? Whereas stress is, I've got a podcast tomorrow with Nigel. I'm stressed about that. Anxiety is like, I'm kind of like replaying that stress over and over and over again. I get this kind of anxiety feeling in my body. So stress is an external factor. Anxiety is something that you feel inside of you. And it's when your nervous system keeps basically the alarm system going on and on and on. And even though that danger has passed. And so stress and anxiety get intermixed, and it's all really driven by cortisol. And the key aha moment for me is when you break away from that natural circadian rhythm and cortisol stays high and doesn't come down because you're constantly on alert with technology, it does two things. It stops melatonin from basically entering your body. It stops you from falling asleep, and it stops you from staying asleep. The aha moment was for me was you make all your hormones predominantly in your sleep. And so if you're not sleeping, you're not making the testosterone, the estrogen, the progesterone that you need.
Right.
And we're in a whole new world today around hormone health that we've never been in before. And it's all caused by technology disrupting our natural biology and keeping our nervous system on high all the time. That was eye-opening for me. That's what the book's about. If you go back in time to the 70s and 80s, we had endings to our day, right? You went to work, you left work. You watched news because it came on at the news hour. It wasn't all day long, right?
Yep.
You went to the cinema and you watched a movie. You went to the video store, you rented one or two for the weekend and you watched with your family. You didn't binge watch 50 episodes and sit on the couch all day long and stay up all night. You went out on a date. You didn't swipe left and right and have anxiety about performance and all those other issues that one may have to deal with in today's world. It was a different world. It was a much slower pace. And what technology we had at the time, whether you want to say it was the Betamax, the VHS, whether it was a cassette player, right? I remember sitting at high school making little cassette mixes for my Walkman of music. And it would take me 2 to 3 or 4 hours to make a mix of 8 songs, right?
Yep.
Because you had to listen to the song. You couldn't go through it at super pace. Fast forward today, we're carrying every video, every photo, every song, every piece of literature written in our pocket. Our office, our work comes with us. That ending to our workday doesn't end. So that off switch is missing, which means that we don't get to reset our nervous system. That's why we're all stressed, because every bing, every notification is basically rudimentarily wired to our body to think it's an alert. There's danger. There's something happening there. And until I react to it, respond to it, and put my nerves, my hesitation, everything at ease, and I calm myself, I'm in a panic. And so every vibration, everyone thinks a vibration, it's harmless, it's a bing, it's a ring. Every single one of those is basically pushing your nervous system to the brink of failure. That's why we're all stressed. That's why we can't sleep. And that is what's going on in the world today. And it's very straightforward when you put the pieces together.
So Justin, you're an entrepreneur. You've run several businesses. You've been very successful. How did you translate this aha moment, as you called it, of cortisol, and its relationship with technology? How did you decide to take that into a new business venture?
Well, that was the initial purpose, right? To look at supplements for skincare. And then we end up looking at endocrinology and go, let's go supplements for endocrinology. My partner and cohorts in the business world prior were experts in pharmaceuticals. And doing cancer drugs, IBD drugs, things like that. And so we went down the path of looking at peptides, and we went down the path of looking at pharmaceuticals. But we wanted to do something that was a little different. So we looked at nutraceuticals. And when I looked at the marketplace, it was really interesting because when you look at the supplement marketplace, especially in the United States, there's a lot of smoke and mirror marketing going on. There's a lot of, here's 10,000 studies on this magical ingredient. I'm using that magical ingredient, therefore all those studies apply to me. And there's a big disconnect between, again, it's a natural supplement, so there's different potencies based on when it was harvested, where it was grown, the soils, the environment it was in, whether it's been damaged since it's been harvested or not. There's a big difference between what was studied in the studies and the actual product that was being claimed. And there's plenty of studies in the world today proving that 95% of supplements just don't enter the body at all. It's all, basically placebo. And so when we went about, okay, how do we separate ourselves from the pack? We looked at two things: how we can get the product into the body, so delivery, and we looked at best quality ingredients we can find. But we then went and we tested our final product.
Right. And that's the big difference.
That's the big difference. We treated ourselves like a pharmaceutical company. We weren't just making claims because someone else did a study. We took the studies of those ingredients. We found the best ones that fit the need that we were looking for. We had a team of doctors, like 12 doctors, endocrinologists, OBGYNs, pharmacists, and so forth. And we looked through all the different ingredients from Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine, and we evaluated the benefits and how it would affect the human body at different levels, whether it's mitochondrial level, whether it's at the endocrinology, whether it was the specific hormone support or sleep support, etc. And so we put a list of ingredients together, and then we started going through trial and error. And we went through probably 65 to 70 different iterations before we found a product that we felt was viable and efficacious through blood studies and through subjective, literally IRB official pharmaceutical grade studies, independently reviewed and so forth. And we came to market with a product that we were marketing for cortisol. What was really interesting is we started getting phone calls from women after about 4 or 5 months. And they're like, this product's amazing. And we're like, well, thank you. And they're like, well, my hot flashes have gone. I said, sorry? Yeah, my hot flashes have gone. Okay, that's wonderful. Can you tell us more? Yeah, I used to be, getting 10 hot flashes a day. They're not there anymore. Others would say I'm sleeping through the night. Others would say my libido's back. I feel like I'm 18 again. We get, husbands and men calling saying, I feel stronger, I'm leaner. My wife likes me again. All kinds of funny comments. And when we took a step back and we looked at everything, we're like, oh my goodness, you're right. By supporting cortisol, it improves sleep. Sleep helps you make your hormones naturally. And when you make the right hormones that your body needs for the following day, everything starts to fall back in place and you start feeling like yourself again. And when you have too many consecutive nights where you don't get the 7 to 8 hours that you need, and or that you wake up in the night, your health starts to unravel. And you just don't feel like yourself again. I think it's pretty obvious how technology is the root cause of that. And I'm not villainizing technology. I'm just saying that is the root cause. Where The technology companies have played an innocent part here as they just try to invent things to help make our lives better. The problem is things like social media have become to play different games with our psyche. They're trying to make them, they're gamifying them, they're making them addictive. They're giving you a dopamine loop that you constantly are trying to fight to get out of. And we have not been taught how to use technology as humans. We've just been taught, hey, they make your life better, they're more efficient, everything works great. And so trying to go against the grain of the pace of the world is not easy, because you're trying to do something, well, we are trying to do something that's right for humanity, but it goes against the culture of work harder, work harder, work harder.
Yeah. What led you to write the book?
It's a very, very good question. And to answer it completely authentically, the problem we were having at Rebalance was we just didn't have the budgets to compete against the noise that's out on social media. It's almost impossible to stand out now and hit the right customer effectively and give them the information they need to make a decision. So my board asked me to write the book. It was driven by the board. It was not meant to be a sales tool. It's not a sales product at all. We think we mention our products in Rebalance in the book very slightly on one page towards the back. As we have a solution that can support this. But the book was written really as the why, what we've been talking about here. It's the why. It's trying to take complicated science, turn it into very simple sound bites that anyone can read and understand. You don't have to read the book in a complete, page 1 through page 200 all in once, right? You can take a chapter at a time. You can take a chapter on menopause, a chapter on sleep hygiene, a chapter on diet. And I take each chapter as its own little story. And what I do is I go back and I use a lot of nostalgic terms, because a lot of the people suffering from stress today were around in the 80s and the 90s. And they can reflect back and go, you're right. How'd I get here when I was there? I mean, Nigel, how many phone numbers did you remember?
Yes. And some of them we can still remember, right back from the 80s.
Brilliant. How many remember the little, you had a little phone box in London and you put your your 50p and your 20p and you make phone calls. You jump on a bus or on a tube. You remembered how to get everywhere, just like, we were a cabbie, right? A black cabbie. We just knew our way around. Kids today, they couldn't tell you their phone numbers of their friends. They couldn't tell you the address of their friends. They couldn't tell you how to get there if they tried without the little phone. And so the world is a different place. The kids respond in a different way. And the book kind of reminds us where we've come from. And it hasn't come that far. I mean, you and I both remember when we only had BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, and Channel 4.
Yep.
Right? When I was a kid and I went to America, there was static on the TV at midnight. And I think only people of a certain age would understand what the word static means.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And so you understand how far we've come, and we've come so far in such a short period of time, we haven't enabled our bodies to catch up. So the whole idea behind the book was to explain that journey and give people a moment to pause and go, oh, yeah, you're right. And one of the big things is, a very human thing, intimacy, right? And I like to break the word down. Into me, you see, intimacy. All used to be about flirting. We called it a silver tongue, right? We used to go out with our mates. We used to go to the pub or go to a club or go to a party, and we used to talk to the other person. We used to get intrigue. We used to ask for a date, a second date, and so forth. Fast forward to, 2010, right? Online dating, swipe left, swipe right, and show up and let's hook up. Well, that started a whole new problem of anxiety, erectile dysfunction, and companies like Hims came into the limelight, and they really started to take off about 8-9 years ago, and they were selling erectile dysfunction drugs, Viagra, to what people thought were 40 and 50-year-olds. No, they were selling them to 20-year-olds discreetly through the mail, because the 20-year-olds had anxiety about performing when they hooked up with their partner.
Yeah.
They had just met because they didn't have a mental connection. We never had this issue. We had mental connection. We had flirting. We already were into that person versus just the physical aspect. I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule all the time, but in the general sense, HIMSS was built on the platform of selling erectile dysfunction drugs to individuals at a young age who were having anxiety about performing in the dating world. That didn't exist in our time.
Didn't, or at least we never heard about it from anybody. Let me ask you this: do you think there's any going back from the technology and what it's doing to our hormones?
Yeah, I think if we can be mindful and we make a conscious decision, everyone can easily leverage the information for their benefit. So they can leverage technology for what it is, an amazing tool to make us super efficient and support us in communicating with whoever we need to communicate with. Do I think that we can get stuck in a horrible pattern? Absolutely. If we're not careful, we can go down the rabbit hole very, very quickly. And mental health has never been more of a serious issue than it is today. People are missing connection with people. And it was kind of the perfect storm. We had a global pandemic of COVID combined with technology, basically supercharged. Then you've got AI coming into play. AI is replacing jobs. I mean, I have teenage kids. I've got one at university. It's 20, one that's about to go to university. And we're talking about what should they study in order to not be basically obsolete at the time they come out.
Yeah, obviously, I'm based over here in the UK. Your business is mostly operating in the US. Do you see much difference in the kind of regimes around supplements in those two jurisdictions, the way they're taken to market and the way they're regulated?
The way they're regulated, definitely. There's different rules and regulations from country to country. As a simple example, melatonin is not considered a drug in the US, and in places like Canada, in Europe, it's considered a drug you need a prescription for. So supplements treated very, very differently across the world for sure. How they're brought to market, again, depends on what the product is and how, but essentially, you have a product, you have to find the consumer, you market to that consumer, hopefully they acquire it, and, that's the basic transaction. So if you keep it simple terms, no, there's no difference in how a product comes to market. There are different strategies on how you can come to market, of course, but essentially the fundamentals are the same.
And I was really intrigued when you were saying that the way you've really wanted to differentiate yourself is to be evidence-led. Once you've got your formulation, and actually make sure that in scientific reviews it can be proven to be efficacious. Would you like to see that being for supplements a mandatory step, or are you quite happy for it to be not regulated, but then you can stand apart by taking that route?
It could be proven to be efficacious. It doesn't mean it's going to work for you as a human. And I think that's a distinction that a lot of people miss. And you can see that they miss it by looking at reviews. Doesn't work. People get so angry and they get on their soapbox. There's plenty of drugs in the world that work for X percentage of the population and don't work for another X percent of the population. And so I think people have gotten so aggressive and quite frankly mean versus being, well, I'm thrilled it works for you. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for me. Does that mean you have to give it a 1-star review and damage a company? I don't think that's the right path. But I think that's the nature of the fact that everyone's stressed, really anxious, and they're frustrated because they want solutions. So it's this horrible cycle.
That's a real spiral, isn't it?
It's just a never-ending cycle, right? Because at one hand, works for one person, works for another. Give you an example. We did a clinical study, double-blind placebo IRB study, which is unprecedented in the supplement space. Over 330 women that were at their wits' end with perimenopausal symptoms. we saw a 94% improvement perimenopause symptoms. 80% of the women saw a reduction of hot flashes that was above 80%. We saw sleeping through the night, better restfulness in the 70s. We saw better libido, better recovery, all in the 60s and 60% range. And so that was wonderful. Did we have some placebo patients in the study going, it works? Absolutely.
Yes.
We had placebos that, and again, these are women that said they were at their wits' end, they tried everything, nothing worked. And we gave them a sugar pill. And of the sugar pill placebo, 40% of the women said miracle drug.
Yeah, to my mind, why would I take something that hadn't been through that sort of clinical approach? It just doesn't seem. I mean, yeah, these things could potentially be doing harm, let alone even.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You'd like to think everything's got GMP practices. It's all been done technically and proficiently in a laboratory. Everything's handled accordingly, and pretty much that's the case. Here in America, the FDA have cracked down on a lot of supplement companies that had claims on their supplement facts that they had X amount of ingredients in there, and in fact, they didn't.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
And so that stuff's been cracked down on. But you go into this really quasi world of saying it works for some people, doesn't work for some people, even if assuming it is efficacious, but it works for some, but it doesn't work for others. And so that's what's opened up the supplement world to, well, if it works for some and doesn't work for others, then what difference does it make? Yeah, I'm just going to put it out there, right? What difference does it make? And I'm not born with that kind of DNA in me. I want to do something that's right and help the world and do something that is actually beneficial to people. And we have technically the only supplement on the market with not one, not two, but 3 IRB clinical studies and published in medical journals around the world showing that our product does actually work. Getting that message out, not easy. So the book again was designed to help spread the message and have people start maybe, well, let's see what Justin's about, see that company and maybe do that. So you can't have a book that's salesy because the publishers won't touch it. So it's very much designed behind, let's try and tell the story of the evolution over the past 30 or 40 years and see if people put the pieces together and go, you know what? I want out of this rat race. I can work hard, I can make a living, but I don't want to be working 16 hours a day. It doesn't make any sense because I'm not performing at my very best and my health is going to suffer.
We've just got a few minutes left, but I'd like to take the discussion slightly away from individuals and thinking about whether there's anything that organizations or leaders could do to help reduce this technology-driven burnout in the workplace. Is there anything that you think as leaders we might be able to do better?
It's a very difficult question because leaders are mandated to drive results, whether they be ultimately financial results, right, to give their shareholders or the investors a return. And so, and the way the world is moving, we're moving faster and faster and faster. And so the way that most leaders work is let's work harder and harder and harder and drive and push more. And I think if leaders were starting to understand that more actually is less, because you talk about productivity, efficiency, accuracy, and creativity and innovation. It doesn't come from having little sleep. It comes from being well-rested, well-balanced, and happy individuals, and mistakes won't be made. And so I think there's definitely something to be said to having leaders understand the dynamic of the biology of the body and how that's in almost juxtaposition to the pace of the world today.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I've always been a great believer that most people do their best work a couple of hours after they wake up. But that only goes if you've had a great night's sleep, right? Otherwise, none of your work is going to be any good at any point in the day.
Absolutely. It's very interesting because, that was me. I was working, long hours, 18-hour days in order to try and generate a result. It isn't always the case.
Justin, your book is out now, Stress Nation. And I urge people to read it. It's a really good treatise on what is going on with technology and how it's affecting our biology, which I'm sure the good folks at Alphabet and Facebook and whatever weren't really considering when they first came up with their business models, but we are where we are today. And I found the book fascinating. So thanks very much for your time this afternoon. It's been a fascinating conversation.
I appreciate you having me, Nigel.
A few things Justin said really stayed with me. First, his central point was not that stress is new. It is that technology has removed the off switch. I thought that was a very clear way of describing modern life. We're not just busy, we are permanently reachable, permanently interruptible, and permanently stimulated. Secondly, I thought his contrast with the 70s, 80s and 90s was useful, not because the past was somehow better in every respect, it certainly wasn't, but because our days had clearer endings. Work stopped, the news came on once, entertainment was limited. Now the office, the inbox and the noise all travel around with us. And thirdly, I was struck by the way he has tried to build his business. In a market full of claims, he has chosen to lead on evidence. For me, that connects directly to what this podcast is all about. Standing apart is not just about sounding different. It's about having the substance to back it up. I've put a link to Justin's book in the show notes. Now, you will all know by now that I love to offload. There are all sorts of things that wind me up, and in the interests of my well-being, I limit myself to 1 minute. So here is this week's 1 minute rant. Start the clock. It's LinkedIn posts that are entirely written for the algorithm and not for actual human beings. You know the ones, a dramatic first line that promises some life-changing business insight, then 15 one-line paragraphs, then a story that almost certainly did not happen quite the way it's being told, and I'm being generous there, then the grand conclusion, leadership is about people. Thank you, Plato. Or there's the post that says, I was asked to leave a client meeting today for telling the truth. No, you weren't. Or the one that starts, no one talks about this enough, immediately followed by something that literally everyone on LinkedIn has been talking about for 3 years. And while we're at it, can we please stop pretending that adding agree at the end of a lazy opinion turns it into thought leadership? This is not content, it is formatting, it is performance, it is people reverse engineering a platform instead of saying something worth reading. If your idea only works because you spaced it out like a GCSE poem, it probably wasn't much of an idea to begin with. Stop the clock. That's almost it for this episode. I hope you've heard something you can put to work in your business straight away. If you have, do someone a favour and share this episode with them. All past episodes are still available, including deep dives into the health tech sector and my recent interview with my local theatre's artistic director, so do have a browse. I have a few fascinating guest interviews coming up. To ensure you don't miss that, make sure you subscribe. And my own book, The Time Traveller's Guide to Management, is now finally available to purchase through my website, and I put a link to that website in the show notes. And a quick reminder, this show only grows if listeners like you back it. The algorithms will not do it for us. So if you can, hit subscribe, leave a rating, and tap that like button in your podcast app. It helps more than you think. Thanks for spending this time with me. Until next time, whatever you do, stand apart from the crowd. Standing Apart is a Sun Bear Consulting production.